Well, I think we'd think of kicking this session off. Good afternoon to you all. It's great to have you here around this celebration. So let me start by welcoming Commissioner Brunner, dear members, dear ambassadors, distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Today we mark 4 decades since 5 European countries signed the Schengen Agreement and set out to create a Europe without internal borders. 40 years later, Schengen remains one of the European Union's most tangible achievements, which is a bold experiment in trust and unity. It created the largest passport-free area in the world, now covering 29 countries, 25 EU members, plus 4 associated countries, including Bulgaria and Romania. On the 1st of January this year, 2025, marking the final step in a long process of integration for the 2 EU countries. Every day, around 3.5 million people travel freely for work, study or tourism across Schengen without passport checks. This freedom has transformed everyday life in families, students and professionals. Schengen also powers our single market by accelerating trade and connectivity. The COVID pandemic has clearly shown that we critically need a Europe without barriers for supply chains and competitiveness. In short, the removal of border controls has reduced costs, increased jobs and boosted our collective prosperity. Security is equally important. By sharing a common external border and databases such as the Schengen Information System, the Visa Information System, and as of last Sunday, the Entry-Exit System, Member States share situational awareness and strengthen police cooperation. As we go through challenging times, it is right, and I would say encouraging, to celebrate one of our most out. But let me remind you that this celebration of Schengen is not about the past. It should be about the future of our Union. And also, celebration is not self-complacency. The integrity of Schengen, its strength as a driving force of integration, the trust of our citizens in this outstanding achievement require commitment, require trust among us. And as far as the Parliament is concerned, it also requires political impulse and monitoring. So I believe that we all can agree that this integration contributes to our prosperity and embodies the EU's promise of unity in diversity. As chair of the Committee of Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs, I see Schengen as a living expression of the European project, a daily experience of a shared European citizenship. And then, following these remarks, I am glad to pass the floor on to Commissioner Magnus Brunner for his opening remarks, and also wish him well in his responsibility within the European Commission. We are working closely with him, and we do intend to continue to work closely with him. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd also like to say thank you for our good cooperation we have with the whole LIBE committee, but with you personally also. Thank you for that, ladies and gentlemen. Minister from Luxembourg, welcome to the Parliament is a bit too much for me to say, of course, but welcome to you, to the Mayor, you can say that. Thank you.
Welcome to the Parliament.
Thank you. Also to the Mayor of Schengen, of course, or cousin as we call him, because they are cousins. The Minister and the Mayor are cousins, which I learned a couple of months ago when we had our celebration in Schengen, which was great, and it feels that we have done quite a lot of celebrations of the 40 years of Schengen. We went on a boat on the Moselle, which was really nice. Thank you again for that. We had celebrations in Vienna, in Brussels, almost everywhere in the European Union, in the Schengen area, which is good. And hello, of course, to our friend and colleague from Cyprus as well. I'm very glad that we are keeping actually these celebrations, these birthday anniversaries, because Schengen is I would say, a truly remarkable achievement. It's one of the biggest achievements we have in the Europe skin over to celebrate it. So each time we celebrate Schengen, 40 years of Schengen, I think is a good way of doing it. Because as you mentioned, Chair, also it touches of a lot of people, of 450 million Europeans or people living in the Schengen area in concrete ways by, as you mentioned, boosting tourism, for instance, making goods cheaper, also opening doors, be it in the work part, being for workers, being for studying also, but also sometimes in more intangible ways. When Schengen began 40 years ago, it marked a new area, I would say, of openness in Europe, a radical change in Europe's history of closed borders in a way. So opening up the borders, that was really something very remarkable. And I would actually bet that those who signed in 1985 would never have imagined that one day their signature would create an open road from the Atlantic to the Black Sea. So that is something which has been developed, of course, in the last years. And I would say there's actually Schengen success. It is down to a constant hard work and also improvements. Keeping Schengen going and growing is made actually possible by on the one hand good police cooperation, continuous training, border authorities sharing the task of protecting each other's borders, and of course also the rules and the policies that we craft all together in the Parliament, in the Council, which allow all of that actually to happen. And we of course know, and of course we are aware of that fact that Schengen is not perfect. Of course not. It has to be developed all the time. That is not what we celebrate today. Not that it's perfect, but we are celebrating the fact that 40 years on we are still growing and we are working to improve the situation. And altogether, I see in general 3 work streams for safeguarding Schengen and also for improving Schengen. The first work stream is to strengthen our external borders. Protecting our external borders. And we, as you mentioned, with the Sunday's successful launch of the new entry-exit system, we are putting in place one of the most modern IT border management systems, a system for external border protection. We have registered, in the meantime, 250,000 people in the last who comes into the European Union, who leaves the European Union, at what time and where. I think that's quite a remarkable step forward. We are also investing in more physical and digital infrastructure, particularly at sensitive parts of the border with hostile neighbors, which we unfortunately have, especially in the eastern part. And this includes new investments in drone surveillance. That is important. Frontex plays a very important role there, as well as also counter drone systems. And we are significantly also boosting the resources of Frontex altogether to assist EU countries operationally in the border management. The second work stream is to fix the problems we have, the challenges we have in the EU's migration management system. This means bringing our European house in order. That is important. That is something we really have to work on. And this Parliament actually agreed, of course, on the pact of migration and asylum last year, and we are pressing on with implementation. I think implementation is key and is a task where we have to deliver. And this Parliament and the Council, of course, as well, are also working on changes in complementing the pact. There were some missing pieces, like the return regulation, like the safe third country concept, like we can deliver on all this. I think we will achieve a remarkable shift, actually, in migration policy, which will also benefit Schengen, of course. The third work stream, lastly, I would like to mention is on internal security. Whether we are talking about terrorism, about global criminal networks, also state-sponsored hybrid attacks, today's threats move actually across the Schengen borders, and in fact across all borders actually, which means we must have also cross-border responses as well. And our new security strategy, the Protect EU, is all about protecting that Schengen actually symbolizes by making, for instance, Europol more operational and also better able to support the national authorities by improving access to data for law enforcement, and most of all, actually, by changing the mindset, changing our mindset to anticipate and also counter threats on a very early stage. That is, I say Schengen is a success, definitely, and will continue to be successful because it is a shared project of all of us. And I'm sure you will have more ideas also this afternoon on how to develop Schengen in the panel discussions, what birthday presents, in a way, we can give to Schengen altogether. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Brunner, for your remarks. And in order to set the stage for today's discussions, now it's my pleasure to introduce you to a video message from the President of the European Parliament, who could not be here with us today, but wished to share her thoughts on this 40th anniversary of Schengen. So let's listen to our keynote speaker, the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola.
Commissioner Brunner, dear Magnus, Chair Zarzalejos, dear Javier, dear colleagues, distinguished guests. In this Parliament, we talk a lot about how we can make Europe work better. 20 years old, the Schengen area remains one of our greatest achievements. It is proof that when we are bold enough to put our shared ideals into action, then Europeans can live and work in 29 countries. Schengen also plays a foundational role in our society, from the single market to tourism. Costs of a Europe without Schengen total up to 18 million euros a year. But above all, Schengen is a triumph of European cooperation and unity. That's why I'm grateful to you both. This is the unifying spirit of Schengen in action, cooperating across national and institutional borders to reflect on how far we have come and to assess the path ahead. Today's discussions remind us that, but a continuous commitment that we have a shared duty to protect and strengthen. And while we must not be blind to the mounting challenges of security and migration across our union, our primary focus must be to preserve and build on the progress that we have already made. This means working together with a constructive, pragmatic outlook to ensure that Schengen doesn't just survive, but fulfills its full potential. However, we must not stop there. We must look to the future with ambition and with hope. This is the European way, and this is why I'm so glad that Bulgaria and Romania have also finally been welcomed into the Schengen area, a step forward that this House had long been pushing for. In a continent once fragmented by borders, Schengen remains an enduring symbol of freedom, of opportunity and of unity. We must work not just to maintain it, but to move forward together with the same courage and conviction with which it was created. Thank you, and I wish you all a very successful event.
Well, thank you. Thanks to the President of the European Parliament. I think it's time to get ready for the panel discussion. Yeah, quite a very distinguished member of the panel. This first panel in this session has a quite, important title: Schengen for a Global Europe, a shared identity, a shared prosperity. That's quite a title, I would say. That we will have the contribution and the inputs of. We bid farewell to the Commissioner.
To move over because
you have to move. Yeah, but you're not leaving then.
No.
Oh, great. Thanks for remaining with us, Commissioner. And I would say that we will have the contribution of distinguished member in this panel. I guess they should be sitting around. Yeah. So I would ask member of the panel to come closer to us. I suppose they We will have the participation of Mr. Ken Leonards, President of the European Court of Justice, who will address us by video message. I have on my left side Mr. Antonio Vitorino, former European Commissioner for Justice and Home Affairs, 1999 to
2004.
2004. That's, quite a period of time, quite an important period of time. For what we are celebrating now. We have Mr. Nicolas Ioannidis, Deputy Minister of Migration and Protection, the Republic of Cyprus, and Mrs. Lena Dupont, our colleague, Chair of the Schengen and Borders Scrutiny Working Group. So I will now give the floor to Mr. Leonards, as President of the European Court of Justice, who will address us through a video message. Mr. Leonards, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Today is a day of celebration as we come together to mark the 40th anniversary of the Schengen area. Who would have imagined 40 years ago that the name of a small idyllic town at the crossroads of Germany, France and Luxembourg would come to embody a symbol of European identity and unity? Today, following a series of treaty reforms that have largely incorporated the Schengen acquis into EU law, Europeans may move freely and securely in an area without internal borders. It was this landmark step, the creation of an area without internal borders, that made it possible for European citizens to travel from Helsinki to Athens, from Warsaw to Lisbon, and from Bucharest to Tenerife, without having to pass through border checks. What once seemed now become a daily reality, shaping the way Europeans live, work, and connect across our continent. The disappearance of internal borders requires the adoption of regarding migration, visas and asylum to secure the EU's external border, whilst welcoming third country nationals who flee persecution. The authors of the treaties aim to develop a common policy in these fields, grounded in the principles of solidarity and fair sharing of responsibility. Similarly, in an area without internal borders, the exercise of free movement should not undermine the powers of the member states and the effectiveness of the applicable national laws that operate on a territorial basis. Europe, the long arm of the law should acquire a transnational dimension so that, for example, criminals are prevented from relying on free movement as a means of pursuing their activities with impunity. Accordingly, the authors of the EU treaties took the view that the free movement of persons should be accompanied by the free movement of judicial decisions. By virtue of the principle of mutual recognition, judicial decisions adopted in the member state of origin are to be recognized and enforced in the member state of enforcement, as if they were its own. Mutual trust, understood as the shared commitment of member states to uphold the values on which the EU is founded, is a cornerstone of the European Union as a whole, and of the Schengen area in particular. Ensuring a level playing field across the EU requires respect for the values of liberty, equality, democracy, the rule of law, and the Court of Justice of the European Union stands as the guardian of the rule of law within the EU legal order. In the Schengen area, this means that EU political institutions must act in keeping with the treaties, that the member states must honor their obligations under EU law, and that individuals, including third country nationals who enter the EU illegally, are to be treated with dignity. Let us take a closer look at these three aspects. First, EU institutions must adopt any EU measures implementing the Schengen acquis under the appropriate legal basis. The concept of legal basis gives concrete expression to the value of respect for the rule of law, since the EU can only act if it enjoys the legal powers to do so. That concept also protects the prerogatives of the member states by means of determining the applicable decision-making procedure and the required political majority. These requirements contribute to upholding the system of checks and balances established by the authors of the treaties. For example, in a case decided in 2024, the Court of Justice declared invalid a regulation that aimed to strengthen the security standards for identifications, as well as for residence documents issued to Union citizens and their family members exercising free movement rights. The court held that the regulation was based on an incorrect legal basis. The EU legislature had relied on a treaty provision requiring voting, whereas unanimity in the Council was required. Following the judgment, the EU legislature adopted a new regulation, this time relying on the correct legal basis. Second, the member states are by the rules and cannot breach them unilaterally. Needless to say, if the member states are unhappy with the current state of secondary EU law, they must work together and change it in accordance with the treaties. For example, in a case decided in 2022, the Court of Justice was asked to interpret the Schengen Borders Code for the purposes of determining the lawfulness of border checks carried out by Austria at its border with Slovenia. The court held that where there is a serious threat to its public policy or internal reintroduce border control at its borders with other member states, but without exceeding a maximum total duration of 6 months. It is only in the event of a new serious threat arising that it can be justified to measure afresh. In interpreting the Schengen Borders Code, the Court of the Legislature considered that a period of 6 months was sufficient for the member state concerned to adopt, where appropriate and in measures enabling such a threat to be met while maintaining the principle of free movement after that 6-month period. Accordingly, the member state concerned could not unilaterally depart from that period of 6 months. After the court delivered its judgment, the EU legislature re-evaluated that political choice, amending the relevant provisions of the Schengen Borders Code in order to give more leeway to the member states. Similarly, the member states must also respect the rules of the game, even in times of crisis, as was the case during the refugee crisis and the health crisis brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. In a seminal case decided in 2023, the court held that the member state may, on public health grounds connected with combating the COVID-19 pandemic, prohibit the crossing of the internal borders of that member state in order to engage in non-essential travel from or to states in the Schengen area classified as high-risk zones, provided that those control measures do not have an effect equivalent to border checks, complies with the Schengen Borders Code. Third and last, human dignity and respect for fundamental rights are key features of the Schengen area. In the EU, the human dignity of every man and woman deserves protection, regardless of whether he or she is young or old, rich or poor, European or foreign, friend. It is a feature that defines the very identity of the EU as a common legal order. That is why, in a case decided in 2014, the Court of Justice ruled included tests that demonstrate an asylum seeker's homosexuality, such as intimate videos. That is also why the court ruled in a case decided in 2022 that in the event of a mass influx of foreigners, member states are precluded from ordering the detention of asylum seekers on the sole ground of the territory of the European Union. Member states depriving asylum seekers of the opportunity of access to the procedure in which applications for international protection are examined. Dear colleagues, dear friends, the Schengen area is a symbol of European identity as an area of freedom, security and justice, founded on common values, where the value of human dignity is center stage. In the changing times in which we live, where authoritarian tendencies are on the rise, we Europeans must continue to promote and protect the Schengen acquis, to move freely one another better. It is this mutual exchange of ideas between free women and men which allows Europe to grow stronger. Thank you very much.
We thank Mr. Ken Leonards, President of the European Court of Justice, for his valuable remarks, reasserting the role of the Court as guardian of the rule of law in the European Union. And now I will give the floor to Mr. Antonio Vitorino, former European Commissioner for Justice and Home Affairs, and looking forward to his contribution. He will share with us his perspective on key moments of the Schengen project, which was consolidated during his mandate. And also we will draw from his extremely valuable experience and the perspective years after his mandate. Antonio, I have here in my notes that you have the floor for about 10 minutes. I'm not going to say that. No, Antonio, you have the floor.
Thank you.
You just have the floor.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, members of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for this invitation. It's very special for me to be here today because, in fact, I had another life before being a Commissioner. I was the chairperson of the committee. of the Libe committee in the 90s, and therefore I can evaluate how important has been Schengen, the pioneer role of Schengen, being the first intergovernmental agreement to be translated and fully integrated into the European Union framework. And when I was the chair of the Libe, it was in the 90s, it was extremely difficult to have information or even to have a say on Schengen, I must say. It was something totally separated. But it was so evident that sooner or later I can say that I had the privilege of being the Commissioner for Justice and Home Affairs, that following the Amsterdam Treaty was in charge of ventilating, that was the word, ventilating the Schengen acquis into the European Union framework, which means treaty into the legal framework of the European Union. And I think that Schengen made a shift in the paradigm. For the first time, the member states accepted that there could be someone in their territory that had not been specifically authorized to be in by them. You have mutual trust, and if you share the responsibility and the duties that come along. My personal feeling is that Schengen has played a key role in laying the ground for the sense of belonging to a joint project and to build a common destiny for Europeans. And it is not by chance that Schengen is probably the most cherished part of the European project to the youth today, probably on equal foot with Erasmus. And if I have something to regret, is that not that often the European Union is credited for the benefits of Schengen free movement area and for the benefits of Erasmus. Having said that, both Chairman Zarzalejos and Commissioner Brunner have already mentioned that the first critical consequence of Schengen was to guarantee that there would be shared responsibility in the integrity of the external border of the European Union, and that could be no weak link in the chain, because if there was a weak link in the chain of external border controls, there would be an internal consequence of that, and the first victim would be free movement inside the Union. And I must say that this project has been completed last Sunday, and as it system. I'll tell you one anecdote. I had to negotiate, together with my late friend and colleague Fritz Bolkestein, the so-called and very famous PNR agreement with the United States, the passenger name record. And when we negotiated it, we required the Americans to accept reciprocity. reciprocity between the duties of Europeans in the US and reciprocity in the duties of the Americans in Europe. They used to joke with us to say, but why are you asking reciprocity if you don't even have a system of entry and exit control? Okay, they were right. And we said, well, we don't have, but we will have. I'm very pleased to say that last Sunday, at least, the rule of reciprocity that was kept in the agreement with the US came into reality last Sunday. And I'm pleased to say that 250,000 have already been registered. It's quite a step forward and the completion of the project. If I have to make a critical reference, I am a little bit concerned with the sequential events of re-establishment internal border controls that we are witnessing today. Re-establishing of internal border controls should be an exception only for specific reasons foreseen in the treaties. It should not become a rule. There are economic tolls when you re-establish internal border controls. There are reputational damages, and therefore I hope that Member States and the Commission will keep an eye on the trend of using public opinion. Because I personally, maybe I'm wrong, but I personally have some doubts that internal border controls are critical for controlling irregular migration. In my view, 60% of the irregular migrants present in the territory of the European Union do not enter irregularly in the European Union. They are the so-called overstayers. They stay beyond the period of time they are allowed to stay. And we have other tools, fortunately, to use to fight against irregular migration, like ordinary law enforcement actions, not at the borders, but in our own cities, which is happening. Secondly, improved labour market supervision, which is a hole in the system to fight illegal work. If you fight illegal work, you are more efficient in detecting irregular migrants. And last but not least, there is still room, in my view, to improve police cooperation and judicial cooperation in the fight against smugglers and traffic worldwide. The second dimension I would like to focus, and I will keep to the 10 minutes, Chair. The second dimension is that the Schengen Agreement had a number of what we called at that time compensating measures. Of course, if you abolish internal border controls, you need to find compensation in terms of security, of internal security. And those compensating measures of Schengen have paved the way for the area of freedom, security and justice. Because in fact, those measures were above all focusing on migration and asylum, as Ken Leonard has mentioned, but also on police cooperation and judicial cooperation. And there we were entering that areas that are at the core of national sovereignty. One day this story will be made, how we have evolved, how we have introduced the capacity to deal with these issues on the basis of European cooperation. But in fact, Amsterdam Treaty made the difference. Secondly, the Tampere milestone, the Tampere European Council, which today, 15th of October, was in 1999 the day where the Tampere European Council adopted the roadmap for the area of freedom, security and justice. And last but not least, of course, the Lisbon Treaty. But all this process depends, as I've just said, and that will be the test for the new pact. That will be the text for the pact on asylum and migration. The success of the pact is critical to keep free movement and also to fight against irregular migration. But that will depend on the mutual trust and the engagement, commitment and the shared responsibility of all member states. Two last remarks. First, on enlargement. From my own experience of 2004 to the 10 Central and Eastern European countries, Schengen was a top priority for the candidate countries. And rightly so. In the negotiations, we made an enormous effort, and I think that we have succeeded, in strengthening border police, border controls, and the capacity of the candidate country with Schengen rules, European Union rules, when it comes to border controls. I must recognize, but of course, if you quote me, I will deny, but I must recognize that we did not pay that much attention to the integrity of the police and the judiciary in the candidate countries. So if I had some remark to make for the future, is to say that when we are enlarging to the Western Balkans and further on, we need to focus not just on the border guards, on the border controls, but also on the functioning of the law enforcement systems, including the functioning of the judiciary. Even more, if we end up with a huge border with Russia and Belarus following the accession of Ukraine. And my concluding remark, I promise, is about the fact that the Schengen is a source of inspiration. And sometimes we do not take too much attention on that. But if you look to Africa, for instance, the nearby continent, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is coupled with a protocol on free movement in Africa that is largely inspired by the European project. Unfortunately, up to now, only 5 African countries have subscribed to the free movement of